She rode in leading one stray. The whole county talked about what followed. The day she rode in, I was fixing the south gate post. Not because it needed it that bad. Because it kept my hands busy and my mind away from the bottle, and that was reason enough. I heard her before I saw her. 2 sets of hooves on the hardpack, one steady, one lagging. I straightened and looked west, and there she came out of the heat shimmer on the Colville Road. A bay mare with a short-coupled rider sitting her clean and upright, and behind, on a rope lead, a half-starved sorrel gelding that didn't want to walk but was walking anyway because she wasn't giving him a choice. She pulled up about 30 yards out and looked at the gate post, then at me, then at the gate post again. "This Harlan Pruitt's place," she said. "Was," I said. "Harlan's been in the ground 4 years." She thought on that. Didn't seem surprised exactly. More like she was sorting a list in her head and crossing something off. "I'm Delia Marsh," she said. "I wrote a letter to Harlan Pruitt in February. He wrote back in March saying he needed a cook and someone to tend the house, and I could have the use of the east pasture and the small barn for my stock." I set down my post hammer. "Harlan wrote you in March." "He did." "Harlan Pruitt died in November." She looked at me steadily. Delia Marsh had a face that'd been weathered some, not old, not young, somewhere in the country of hard years and straight thinking. Her coat was good quality once. Her boots were worn but cared for. The sorrel gelding swayed on the rope, and she reached back without looking and steadied the lead without yanking it. "So there's no position," she said. "No position." She looked out across the yard, at the house, which needed paint, at the water trough, which needed cleaning, at the south gate post, which I'd been hammering crooked for the better part of an hour. "You work here," she said. "I am here," I said, which was the truest answer I had. "My name is Cole Reardon. I had been deputy sheriff of Dunnet County for 11 years, and then I had been nothing much for 3. And then I had come out to the Pruitt place because Harlan was an old man alone, and I owed him a debt I couldn't repay in money. I'd been out here 2 years when Harlan died. I stayed on because I didn't know what else to do with myself, and because the cattle needed working, and because it turned out I could function at something like a human level if I kept moving and kept off the whiskey, and didn't think too hard about Dunnet, or what I'd left there, or the particular silence of a house where a wife used to be. I was 53 years old, and I had started to think of myself mostly in past tense. She didn't ask me to explain myself. She looked at that sorrel gelding drooping on the end of her lead, and then she looked at me. "He all right?" I said. "He was tied to a fence post outside Colville with no water and his hip bones showing," she said. "I've had him 4 days. He's eating, slow." I walked over. The gelding flinched when I came close, then held. I ran my hand along his neck, ribs like barrel staves, a scar on his shoulder that was old and healed wrong. He turned one dark eye at me, and I stood there a minute with my hand on him. "East pasture's got good grass," I said. "Small barn's got 3 empty stalls." She looked at me. "You can use the east pasture," I said, "and the stalls. I can pay for the use of them, some." "Work it out later," I said. "Get him settled first." She didn't argue. Didn't thank me too much either, which I respected. Just turned her mare and rode toward the small barn, and the sorrel came along easier than he had in days. That is how Delia Marsh came to the Pruitt place, not how people tell it in town, which has gotten complicated over time. The plain truth is she rode in leading a starved horse. I opened a gate, and neither of us had anywhere better to be. She slept in the small barn that first night. I didn't ask her to. In the morning I found she'd swept it out and put new straw down, working around the gelding who stood in the corner of the stall watching her with something that wasn't quite trust yet but was moving that direction. I made coffee in the main house and brought a cup out. She took it and drank it standing in the barn doorway looking at the pasture in the early light. "I can do the house," she said. "Cook, clean, whatever wants doing. That was the arrangement with Harlan. You don't owe me the arrangement with Harlan. I know I don't, she said. I'm offering it. I need somewhere to be for a while. This looks like somewhere. I thought about that. The house hadn't been properly kept since Harlan's last winter. I'd been holding it together in the way a man does when he's not really caring, fixing what breaks, not fixing what doesn't. Room in the house, I said. The back bedroom, warmer than the barn, and you don't have to earn it. She considered the offer the way she seemed to consider everything, straight on, without hurry. All right, she said. That was day 2. She didn't talk much, and neither did I, and that suited us both. She learned the place the way a capable person does, by watching once and then doing. She found where the flour was kept, how the stove ran hot on the left side, which of the pasture gates stuck. I found that she was up before me most mornings, and that she'd already had the fire going, and that she'd taken to sitting with the sorrel gelding each evening while he ate, not petting him exactly, just being near him, and that he'd stopped flinching when anyone came close. She named him Pardon. When I asked why, she said he deserved one, and that was all she said about it. I had cattle to work and fencing to finish, and a dozen other things that wanted doing before the weather turned. She didn't make any of it harder. She didn't ask to be entertained or explained to. When I came in at dark, she had food on the table, and she sat across from me, and we ate, and sometimes we talked, and sometimes we didn't, and I started to think that the silence of the house was different now. Not lighter exactly, just occupied in a way that didn't press on me. One morning about 3 weeks in, Ike Dalloway rode out from town. Ike was the county assessor, and a man who'd always made me feel he was calculating something behind his eyes, even when he was just saying good morning. He said good morning. Then he looked at the small barn, at the east pasture where Pardon was getting his legs back, at the main house where a woman's wash was on the line. Heard you had company out here, Cole, he said. A tenant, I said. East pasture and the small barn. In the house. She keeps the house. Ike looked at me with that calculating look. Harlan didn't have family to leave this place to, he said. Deeds in some question. County might have an interest in how the land gets used. I looked at him. I had learned things in 11 years of wearing a badge, and one of them was exactly what a man's face looked like when he was building up to something. You'll want to talk to the county attorney then, I said. I'll be here. Ike said he supposed he would, and rode back out. That evening I told Delia. She listened without interruption. How much question is there about the deed? She said. Some. Harlan never remarried after his first wife. No children. He told me once he'd meant to put the place in my name, and he never got around to it. I looked at my hands. That's not a legal document. No, she said. If the county decides to press on it, they press on it. She was quiet for a bit. Then she said, You've been here 6 years. 5 and change. You fixed the well, the south fence line, the roof on the main barn. I can see all of it. I was here, it wanted doing. That's not nothing, Cole, she said. Not sharp, plain, like she was just putting a fact down on the table that she thought I'd missed. I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say, but I noticed it. The county attorney's name was Prentice Webb, and he was a reasonable man who wore his reasonableness like a clean shirt, put on fresh each morning, careful not to dirty it. He came out 2 weeks after Ike. I met him in the yard, and Delia came out of the house and stood on the porch, not interfering, just visible. Prentice Webb took in the yard, the repaired gate post, the rehung barn doors, the new shingles on the south face of the house roof that I'd put up in September, a working cattle operation in better shape than it had been in years. He took out a ledger and made notes and asked me some questions about the cattle count and the well and the fencing, and I answered straight. He asked how long Mrs. Marsh had been in residence, and I said about 6 weeks. He wrote that down. Before he left, he said, I'll report that the property is under active stewardship and recommend the county take no immediate action on the deed question. That'll hold things for a while." He paused. "You might want to look into getting something more formal in writing. A man in your position, 6 years of work, there are remedies." I said I'd look into it. After he left, I stood in the yard for a while. Delia came down off the porch. "He's going to leave it alone," she said. "For now. Long enough to do something about it properly." "Maybe." She nodded. She looked at the yard, the gate, the barn, the roof. I don't know what she was thinking exactly, but she looked at it the way a person looks at a thing they've decided belongs to someone. "You built this place back up," she said. "Harlan built it. Harlan built it, and then he got old and it fell apart and you put it back together," she said. "That's not the same as it was." I looked at her. She was looking at the barn, not at me. Her jaw was set the way it got when she was sure of something. November came in cold. Pardon was filling out by then, the hip bones gone, a softness coming back to his coat. He'd started coming to the fence when Delia walked out, and then after a while he started coming to the fence when I walked out, and Delia noticed this and seemed to consider it a verdict on my character, though she didn't say so. The first real snow came on a Tuesday. I was out checking the cattle when it started, and I pushed them toward the lower pasture and got back to the barn as the sky went white and close. Delia had already pulled extra hay and broken the ice on the trough and moved Pardon inside. I stood in the barn doorway looking out at the snow coming down, and she came and stood beside me. "How bad?" she said. "Hard to say yet, could be nothing, could be 3 days." She nodded. "There's enough in the house." There was. She'd been laying things in since October in a quiet, methodical way I'd noticed without remarking on. Flour, salt pork, oil for the lamps. The kind of preparation a woman makes when she's decided she's staying somewhere through winter. That thought sat with me. It snowed 2 days. We were inside more than usual, and the house was warm, and there was coffee and food, and the particular feeling of being in a warm place while a storm goes outside, which is something I had not felt in a long time. Not since before my wife passed, which was 4 years before I'd come to the Prout place, which made it 9 years since I'd felt that feeling, and I hadn't known I was missing it until I felt it again. On the second evening, she was sitting at the table sewing up a tear in one of her coats, and I was at the other end cleaning the Winchester I'd had since I was 32 years old, and she looked up and said, "What happened to you before this?" I looked at her. She looked back, patient, not pushing. I told her about Dunnett, about the years with the badge, about my wife, Margaret, who died of a fever one March when the ground was still frozen and I wasn't home because I was in the next county tracking a man I never caught, and by the time I got back it was over. About how after that I did the job for 2 more years because I didn't know what else to do, and then one day I couldn't anymore and I came out here and Harlan gave me work and I stayed. She listened, all of it. Didn't try to fix any of it. When I was done, she was quiet for a while, finishing her stitching. Then she said, "My husband wasn't a bad man. He just wasn't strong. When things went wrong, he went to pieces and I held them together for a long time and then I couldn't hold them anymore and then he was gone." She bit the thread off. "I'm not looking to hold someone together again." "I'm not going to pieces," I said. "No," she said, "you're not." She looked at me directly then, a clear, settled look. "That's why I'm still here." I held that. The Winchester had an oil rag in my hand and I was not moving it. Outside the snow was easing off. "Pardon's doing well," I said, because I needed to say something that wasn't too large. "He is," she said. And she smiled, which she didn't do often, and when she did it changed her face in a way that I had started to notice, and then tried to stop noticing and had mostly failed. January brought Ike Dalloway again. This time he had 2 men with him, brothers named Cord and Fitch Bauer, who ran a spread north of town and had been circling the Prout land in conversation for years. The three of them rode in with the kind of ease that meant they'd talked it over beforehand. Ike said the county had reconsidered its position on the deed, said there were questions about stewardship that had come to light. I looked at Cord Bauer, then at Fitch. Neither of them met my eyes straight. "What questions?" I said. Ike said there had been concerns raised about the cattle count, about whether the property was being worked appropriately. He didn't name where the concerns came from. I said, "The cattle count is in the same ledger Harlan kept. I've added to it. Prentice Webb saw it in October." Ike said Prentice Webb had been asked to step back from this matter. I saw how it was. Delia had come out onto the porch. She stood there quiet. I said, "You'll want to come back with the county attorney present, Ike, the one who actually has authority to speak on deed questions, not these two." I looked at the Bauer brothers. "And you two can ride back the way you came." Cord Bauer was big, and he knew it. He said he wasn't sure I was in a position to be making that call. I looked at him for a long count. "I was deputy sheriff of Dunnet County for 11 years, I said. "I know every court filing and legal process in the state that touches on land title. I know how long it takes and what it costs and what a judge looks like when he's been bought and what he looks like when he hasn't. You bring me something legal and I will answer it in a legal way. You ride onto this property again without it, I'll know what you are." Nobody said anything for a beat. Fitch Bauer said something low to his brother. Cord looked at me another moment. Then they turned and rode out. Ike Dalloway looked like a man who'd borrowed trouble he hadn't budgeted for. He followed them. I stood in the yard and waited until they were off the property. Delia came down off the porch. She came to stand next to me, both of us looking out at the empty road. "Will they come back?" she said. "With something legal, maybe. Without it, no." She was quiet. "They thought you'd fold," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Most people in my position would have," I said. "Nothing official, easy to push." "But you know the law." 11 years of it." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "We should get that conversation with the county attorney moving, the real one." I said. She turned and looked at me, straight, clear, with that settled look. "If that's all right," she said. I looked at her. At the yard, the barn, the fence posts, the cattle moving in the lower pasture. At the small barn where a horse with a heel-drawn shoulder scar had come back to something like health. "Yeah," I said, "it is." We rode to Colville in February. Delia sat the bay mare like she always did, clean and upright, and Pardon was on a light lead at her side, not needing much persuading anymore. I thought she was bringing him to sell or to let him stretch his legs, but when I said something she said she didn't think a horse who'd been abandoned once needed to see her ride away from him if she didn't have to. I thought about that the rest of the ride in. The attorney we saw was a woman named Frances Good who had come up from the territory courts and had a reputation for not being impressed by much. We laid out what we had: Harlan's letter about his intentions, 6 years of work and improvements, the cattle ledger, Prentice Webb's October visit. Frances Good listened and wrote things down and asked sharp questions, and at the end said she thought there was a workable path and that Ike Dalloway had overreached himself, and that if the Bauers wanted to push it, they'd find it expensive and slow. We were outside on the Colville Street in the cold when Delia took my arm. Just took it, easy and natural, the way you'd take someone's arm when you decided something. We walked back to where the horses were tied, and people on that street saw us, and it got back to the county the way things do, and that is probably where most of the talking started. I did not mind the talking. The deed came through in April, in my name. Frances Good sent the papers out, and I signed them at the kitchen table, and Delia witnessed it and put the pen down and looked at me. "Harlan would have been glad," she said. "He would have complained it took too long," I said. She laughed at that. She'd been laughing more by then, and I'd gotten so I was watching for it the way you watch for the first good weather in spring. Something you know is coming, but that gets you anyway. I put the deed in the strongbox where Harlan had kept his. The county talked about what followed, like the story says they did. They talked about the woman who rode in leading astray, and the man she'd taken up with, and what he'd done to the Bauer brothers, and how the Prute land had come into proper hands. They talked about it the way people talk about things that surprise them, with more admiration than they'd admit. Most of what they said was wrong in the particulars, and right in the broad shape. The broad shape was this. She rode in with a horse nobody else would have led, and I opened a gate, and we found out we were the same kind of stubborn, and that is not nothing. She is someone who makes decisions and lives by them, and doesn't need persuading to stay when she's decided to stay. I am someone who does what needs doing because it needs doing, and doesn't explain himself much. Between those two things, a life can be built. Pardon wintered well and came out the other side of it with the barrel stave ribs gone and a new way of carrying himself, head up, ears forward, not expecting the worst from every approaching hand. I know that feeling, though I wouldn't have said so before. I was out at the south fence one morning in May, which is where I was the day she rode in, though it was a different section, and the post was not crooked this time. I looked up, and she was coming across the pasture on foot with 2 cups of coffee, walking through the new grass. She handed me one. She stood next to me looking out at the land, mine, now, properly and legally, every acre of it. "Good morning," she said. "It is," I said. She was standing close enough that her shoulder was against mine, and the coffee was hot in my hands, and the grass was moving in a light wind coming off the flats, and somewhere in the upper pasture Pardon was running because he felt like it, which he had started doing lately for no reason except that he could. I did not say anything else. There wasn't anything else that needed saying. That is the whole of it. That is what they talked about.